Let's turn to Exodus chapter 21. Exodus chapter 21. Last week we did not make it as far as I hoped. Last week we were discussing the laws of murder, manslaughter, and injury, and we didn't really make it to the injury part. So if you have notes from that, kind of cross that off, and we're going to shift that over to this week. And as we pick up where we left off in verse 18, this week we are going to talk about the laws of injury and property. Okay, the laws of injury and property. God established guidelines for the judges of Israel to rule in cases of personal injury. Jesus said that if a man loves the Lord with his heart, soul, mind, and strength, and he loves his neighbor as himself, on this you can hang all the law and the prophets. Telling us that the law hinges basically, in nutshells, down to loving God the right way and loving our neighbors the right way. Now the question always comes up, what does that look like? These laws show us what it looks like. Okay? It shows us what it looks like, really, as we love our neighbors. Let's pick up with verse number 18. Number 1, recompense for injury. Okay, recompense for injury. There are a number of scenarios that are given from verse 18 down through verse number 27 that deal with specific injuries and how to recompense, what the penalty was, guidelines that the judges could use to rule in those scenarios, right? You've heard of personal injury cases. That's what we're dealing with here in this stretch. Verse 18 says, if men strive together and one smite another with a stone or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed, if he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit. Only he shall pay for the loss of his time and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. Now, sometimes men fight. There are some times that disagreements escalate to the point of coming to blows with one another. Now, it shouldn't be that way, right? Again, if you can hang the law and the prophets and the law and the commandments on love God and love your neighbor, it's hard to imagine that if we loved each other the right way, that we should ever come into a situation that escalates to physical confrontation. It does happen, though. Obviously, the Bible's not naive. Those things do happen. When you're dealing with people, things escalate. How do we address those things? In this episode in our text, it has escalated. In fact, it's gotten so intense that one guy has struck another to the point that he is badly hurt. It tells us there, maybe it was with a stone, maybe it was with his fist, but he struck someone and he's hurt him very, very badly. Now, he hasn't killed him in verse 18. He's not dead. He died not. But he keepeth his bed. I mean, he's up for a while. He's bedridden. He's seriously injured. Now, the recompense for this case, it says in verse number 19, if he can recover, if he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit. In other words, he's off the hook. Now, by off the hook, we mean that he's free from serious legal penalty. He's serious from real legal punishment. He's really, he's not going to be in trouble as far as that. Certainly not capital punishment or anything like that. But where he's not off the hook is that he is still responsible to pay. If you can't control yourself and you come to blows with your neighbor and you strike at him to the point that you seriously injure him, you better hope he survives. Okay? But even if he does survive, if he's been bedridden, if you've seriously injured him, what does verse number 19 say? Only he shall pay for the loss of his time and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. You are responsible for the medical bills. You are responsible for the time that he has lost. That's what it says. He shall pay for the loss of his time. If we're dealing with a period where there's no such thing as vacation time, where there's no such thing as sick time, and there's really no concept of short-term disability. Short-term disability that you cause, you pay for. You put somebody out of work for a while, you pay for it. You pay, make sure that they are thoroughly healed. You make sure that they can recover and get back to normal. And then you pay for the time that they have lost. Again, we're talking about a mutual striving. These men are fighting, but one of them is the cause of the other man incurring serious debts. You have to pay those. Okay? You have to pay those. You have to make him whole. You've got to make him right. Now that's, of course, if he die not. Because if he dies, then you get into the other laws that we talked about last week. The judges now have to determine, is this murder? Is this manslaughter? And then maybe some of those laws would take into effect. But we're talking about serious personal injury. You cause it, you pay for it. So that's men fighting. Verse number 20 is going to get into the rights of a servant. In our first lesson, back a couple weeks ago, we talked about the laws of servanthood. And I mentioned there that servants in Israel had certain rights and that they had certain protections from like harsh treatment. Let's read what the Bible says here, verse 20. And if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Now, just because they are your servant does not give you the right to harsh treatment. Remember when we talked about that in the first lesson? Israel is transitioning away from the surrounding cultures of the time where servants were viewed as nothing but slaves, animals for labor. They had rights in Israel. They had protections. If you strike a servant so that it ends in their death, you're going to be punished. I mean, we're going to have to start investigating. We're going to have to start talking about the laws of murder and manslaughter, and we're going to have to determine what the punishment is. You can't just kill someone and say, oh, well, they're my servant. No, they have rights. You can't just strike out at people and use the excuse, well, it's just a servant. So you hit your servant, smite them with a rod, and they die, you're going to pay. There's going to be some form of punishment, some sort of severe punishment. Now, verse 21 says, now notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. Now, this is where the judges are going to have some discretion. And, of course, the judges would always have the authority and the right to investigate. They're going to need to investigate. If the servant can continue on, then he shall not be punished. Now, why? Why would he not be punished in that scenario? The answer is given here because it says the phrase, he is his money. Now, what does that mean? He is his money. Well, again, remember we talked about servanthood. We mentioned that a lot of times in the Old Testament, servanthood was a mutual transaction whereby someone would pay off a debt. In the case of a servant who brings a case of abuse against his master, one of the judges is likely going to investigate extent and intent, right? The extent of the injury and the intent in the master. Now, if there's no lingering evidence of foul play, right? It says there in verse 21, notwithstanding if he continue a day or two. So we're talking about no lingering evidence of foul play. The judges will likely determine that there is no punishment. And why? Because it's going to be assumed that the master has a vested interest. He has a financial interest. He has money at stake in this scenario. If you are my servant, let's maybe put the cookies on the lower shelf here. If you're my servant and you're working for me because you owe me a debt, I really have an incentive not to kill you, right? Not to harm you. not to put you, of course, either dead or to strike you or hurt you to a point where you cannot physically work to begin paying off those debts, right? That makes practical sense. That makes logical sense. If you are working for me, if you're my servant, I have a financial interest in you being able to work and you being able to perform those duties and pay off that debt. Now, if I strike at you, if I kill you or I harm you, guess what? I'm not getting my money back, am I? You're my servant, you're trying to pay off a debt. Well, now I'm not getting that money back. I really have no reason to kill or to harm a servant. And this is where the law, and you can actually see the reflections of these kind of laws even in our culture, even in our society, because here we've actually got something that lends itself to one of the core and basic concepts of American justice, an assumption of innocence until proof is given otherwise, right? Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. The judges are going to look in that, and they're going to see that if the servant can continue, there was obviously nothing intentional there. There's not much of a case there because that just doesn't make any sense, right? Where's the motive? What's the motive? If he harms his servant, if he puts him out of work, he can't pay back his debt. The servant obviously looks like he's okay. The judges are going to go into this with the assumption that he's innocent unless there's proof otherwise. So if you strike him so that he's, of course, dead, or we'll get into it in a little bit, where you strike him so that he's like physically maimed, loses an eye, loses a tooth, all of those things are covered. The assumption that, okay, there's not really any lingering evidence here of foul play. We're going to assume that because he's your servant, you have a vested interest in him actually being well and able to work, there won't be a penalty, okay? This is where the law is actually very, very just practical, as it gives judges guidelines to look at cases and look at scenarios and try to determine intent and extent. Okay? And so if different intention or motive can be determined and the extent of the injury is varying, then you're likely going to have varying degree of penalty and outcome in the case. We often use the phrase, let the punishment fit the crime. And so to do so, you have to actually investigate what happened. What is the extent of the injury? What is the outcome in all this? And then the judges can make determination based on those investigations. Okay? This almost starts to sound more like a legal class. And yet, this is how God gives Israel and their judges the right to judge and to govern Israel as a people. Okay? Now there's the scenario of men fighting. There's the scenario of a man striking a servant. Verse 22 and 23 deal with a unique scenario of this fighting or this striving between men carries over from those verse 18 and 19, and yet now someone else is involved because look at verse 22. If men strive and hurt a woman with child. So now we've got innocent bystanders. You've got a woman that's expecting, and the men are striving and she's hurt, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow. He shall be surely punished according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. So again, men are striving here. And Brother John talked about this one a few weeks ago. Differences of opinion maybe about what exactly is intended here. Some say that they're talking about the loss of the child in verse 22, and no mischief following refers to the death of the mother. Others say that verse 22 is talking about, causing a premature birth, and yet no mischief follows because neither the mother nor the child die. But there's going to be some kind of fine or penalty levied against the abuser or the cause of it. What is pretty clear from the passage is that there's certainly going to be a penalty applied for pain and suffering. Whatever you determine verse 22 and 23 mean, there is a penalty applied for pain and suffering. And now that is up to and including the death penalty. Okay? We want to be careful to note that harm that results in death, you might be liable. And if found so, you might forfeit your life as well. Now, the father is going to lay a fine or a penalty on the man responsible. The judges will determine, they'll review that according to verse 22 and determine if yes, indeed, that was what he will pay. Now, the judges, of course, are going to have a guideline. Okay? The judges will have this guideline in verse 24, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Now, in all of these cases, we've come down to the judges determining of what? Satisfactory justice. Again, we use that phrase, the punishment fits the crime. Right? Now, if I knock your tooth out, I don't get the death penalty, right? If I murder you in cold blood, I don't get a slap on the wrist. We're talking about satisfactory justice. Let the punishment fit the crime, because again, that ensures the two things it's talking about. Number one, the suppressing of personal vengeance. The nation of Israel cannot and would not be a place of vigilante justice, where men take the law into their own hands and try to determine the outcome for someone who has wronged them. You and I struggle with that. Men often go overboard on recompense. Right? Was it Lamech or who was it said that if Cain be avenged, I'll be avenged sevenfold? There is often this idea that if you wrong me, when I wrong you, I'm going to escalate it. I'm going to up it. I'm going to make it worth the trouble. We can't have that. Israel can't have that. Men, if they were to look and they were to see that their servant had been stricken, or if they were to see that their wife had been stricken, or potential injury or loss to a child, a premature birth, pain and suffering, when they go to levy upon someone a penalty, men would always go overboard. Men would always go more. This has to suppress that. These laws are intended to suppress and to make sure that the punishment fits the crime. So number one, the suppressing of personal vengeance, and number two, the satisfactory justice. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Those are the guidelines. You say that seems really simple. It is, but it is nuanced, right? Because the punishment has to fit the crime. And with that, you've just been given a list of scenarios in the preceding verses where these things are a little different, right? You have to actually determine intent, maybe motive. You actually have to determine the extent of the injury. How long has this guy been out? Is he actually bedridden? Is he out of work? Can he return to work? Can he recover? This guy's servant, did he kill his servant? Or, after a couple of days, after the investigation, the servant doesn't, it doesn't look like there's that much there. It doesn't look like there's a big deal there. Let the punishment fit the crime. After investigation, satisfactory justice. That's what it talked about here, recompense for injury. And you got to have guidelines for what that means. And so, generically, we're going to say that the punishment needs to fit the crime. Verse 26, it says, "And if man smite the eye of his servant, or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth, or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go free for his tooth's sake." Now, recompense has a slightly different application when it comes to masters and servants. Because if a master strikes his servant, causes him to lose the use of his eye, causes him to lose use of his tooth. You say, well, what's the recompense for that? Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, right? When it comes to masters and servants, if a master strikes his servant so that he loses his eye, he gets something a lot more valuable in return than an eye. He gets his freedom. Or he gets something a lot more valuable than a tooth. He gets his freedom. These laws are going to guard the behavior of a master, again, so that he treats his servants more like an employee than he does a slave, just another one of his work animals. We're seeing repetitive themes here, right, in the right treatment of people. It really does make sense when you start looking that, if you love your neighbor as yourself, there's a lot of these laws that, man, they fall right under that. That can be a much bigger heading, and all of these things fall into place. All right. Recompense for injury. That was number one. Number two, injury and property. Injury and property. Again, we're just talking all the practicals here of chapter 21. Let's look at verse 28. It says, if an ox gore a man or a woman that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. But if the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, and it hath been testified to his owner, and he hath not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. Now, in verse number 28, we have a story here of an ox that kills someone, right? You've got a bull that lowers his horns, and he attacks, and he gores someone, and that person is killed. Now, this is going to be assumed, verse 28, it's going to be assumed to be an accident, right? If an ox gore a man or woman that they die, the ox shall surely be stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. It's assumed to be an accident, right? The animal doesn't have a history of aggression, so the owner is not going to be held guilty. The owner won't. Now, the animal has to die, right? They're going to stone the animal, and the owner of the animal doesn't get to profit from it. He doesn't get to eat off of it. It's like, well, we were going to kill that ox, and at the holidays anyway. No, if you've got an ox and it kills someone and it's truly an accident, the animal has to die. And you don't get the profit from it. You don't get the meat from it. It's dead. Now, verse 29 gives us a different scenario, because here the ox has a history of aggression. And you've been warned. And you've been told, man, you've got an aggressive bull there. I've seen him lower his horns. I've seen him run, take off. You probably ought to pin that thing in. You've been warned, and you've been told about that, and you don't control it. You don't fence it in. You don't take precautions to make sure it doesn't attack. Now, not only is the ox guilty, but you're guilty. You were warned. You were told. You know that your animal has a history of being aggressive toward people, and you didn't do anything about it. You didn't do anything to fence it in or to protect your neighbor. You're guilty. These are what we would call neglect. Now, these two scenarios in verse 28 and 29, they're not the same, right? You have to be able to see that they're not the same. Yes, in both cases, an ox gores someone. An ox has killed someone. But the first case is assumed to be an accident. The second case, where the owner has previously been warned and the animal has shown a history of aggression, it is not assumed to be an accident. It is not assumed to be something that just happened, or how could I have known, or how could I have prevented it? You could have prevented it. You know this animal. And so it dies, and you might die too. Love thy neighbor as thyself. That covered. You say, what does that look like in practice? It's certainly that you be cautious and thoughtful, and don't let neglect be something that becomes part of your character. Don't neglect to care for your stuff and the things that could be a harm or a hurt to other people. Look in Deuteronomy chapter 22. Deuteronomy chapter 22. And we'll just read one verse here, I think. Yeah, let's read verse 8. Deuteronomy 22, verse 8. When thou buildest a new house, then thou shalt make a battlement for thy roof, that thou bring not blood upon thine house, if any man fall from thence. You're obviously talking about a culture and a time where people, if they had roofs, they had flat roofs, right? If you build a new house, if you've got a roof up there, which would have been common for folks to go up to the roof, to rest, to relax, whatever it might have been, put a railing up, put a battlement up around the edge so that, you don't bring blood up on thy house if somebody falls off. The neglect, right? Somebody falls off the edge of your house, you might look at them and say, well, what a dummy. Why was he standing that close to the edge? No. Put a railing up, right? Do what seems logical and responsible to take care of the lives of other people. And so that falls under the subject of neglect. And God does not want Israel to be a people that neglect to care for their neighbor. Okay, it's not just a positive thing. It's not just something that you always are seeking out things out there to do. It's making sure that you don't neglect to take the basic thoughts and cautions about what could be harmful to others. Don't do things that could be harmful. If you build a house, put up a railing on the roof. If you've got an ox that's got a history of aggression, fence it in. I mean, we're not talking about things that are illogical. We're not talking about things that seem hard or even overly oppressive for you. Take basic steps of precaution. If you've got an animal that's aggressive, if it turns out to be aggressive and it kills someone, but buddy, you don't have an out at that point. You're responsible. So let's look back at our text there in Exodus 21. Cautious and thoughtful. Verse number 30. If there be laid on him a sum of money, then he shall give for the ransom of his life whatsoever is laid upon him. So there's the scenario where, again, you've got the ox that was known to be aggressive and it's killed someone, and now you're on the hook. There were certainly cases where maybe you didn't forfeit your life, but you had to pay the family your ransom money. There may be times in Israel where, a grieving family, their sense of justice is not necessarily that you need to lose your life, but, they're out a dad or they're out a brother. And that's a great, great loss. You may have to make them financially whole. You may have to, redeem or ransom your own life with a nice lump of money. We see kind of those things, right? Financial responsibility laws that we have even in our culture and country. Verse 31, whether he have gored a son or have gored a daughter, according to the judgment shall it be done unto him. Whatever it is, for whoever it is. Verse 32, if an ox shall push a manservant or a maidservant, he shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. If you've got an ox that's aggressive and it kills one of my servants, no, you didn't kill me, but now, what about that debt that was in the works of being paid? Now you've killed one of my servants. You're on the hook. You've got to pay 30 shekels of silver. You're going to cover the debts that were likely trying to be paid by that servant. Verse 33, if a man shall open a pit. So he's dug a pit. If a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or an ass fall therein, the owner of the pit shall make it good. And give money unto the owner of them, and the dead beast shall be his. If you dig a hole, dig a pit, whatever your motives were, whatever your reasons were, you dig a pit, and my animal falls in it, and it breaks its leg, and now I'm out an ox, well, guess what? You just bought yourself a dead ox. You have to pay. You have to pay me back for that. It was your fault. You dug the pit. You didn't cover it. You didn't secure it. You're assumed to be at fault, and you have to pay. Congratulations. What does it say there? The dead beast shall be his. You can have the ox. It's yours, but you have to pay for it. Verse 35, and if one man's ox hurt another's, so we're talking about animals here that he die, Then shall they sell the live ox and divide the money of it, and the dead ox also shall they divide. So you and I have ox that end up, fighting. That's not even the right word, right, when you're talking about ox. Animals, but there's some kind of confrontation there, and one animal kills another. How do we divide that up? Half and half, right? You take the dead animal and you divide the meat. You sell the live animal and you divide the profit, and you make it fair. One of you is out an ox, and it's really hard to determine responsibility and intent and all of those things. So if we can't, we're just going to divide it up halfway. That seems logical. That seems right and responsible. Verse 36, or if it be known that the ox hath used to push in time past, and his owner hath not kept him in, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead ox shall be his own. So again, this is where we're talking about neglect. If you know that you've got an aggressive ox, and it kills another one, congratulations, they get the live one, you get the dead one. These laws, again, about injury and property is making sure that Israel is a place of real, true justice, satisfactory justice, where neglect matters, intent matters, but people are recompensed for carelessness, thoughtlessness, and for serious injury that comes at the hand of another. Most of these things are not capital crimes. Most of these things are not escalated as far as that kind of punishment. But you have to do people right. If you are responsible for someone's loss, and maybe it's injury, maybe it's physically, maybe it's the loss of their property. If you're the cause of it, we're not going to just be a nation that says, oh, my bad. Yeah, it is your bad, and you've got to make that right. Okay? So there's sometimes that our thought was, well, should I be punished? I didn't mean for that to happen. Well, maybe you didn't mean for that to happen, but you got a couple scenarios here where you didn't take steps to prevent it, and you knew you had a problem. If I've got a dog and it bites you, that might be an accident. After it bites 3 or 4 people, it's not an accident anymore. And you put that thing on a leash, and you put that thing in a fence, and you make sure that thing is penned up. Why? Because you have a dog that bites. And, well, my dog's usually really, really friendly. No, your dog's not usually friendly. Your dog bites people. And there's evidence that your dog bites people. So you pen it up. And you make sure that your love for your neighbor supersedes all of those other things. You take steps to make sure that they're cared for. If you cause injury to someone, and this is just practical now, if we hurt someone, if we cause injury to someone, try to make it right, okay? Try to do right by them. Things in our country have gotten so weird with this concept of lawsuits and civil judgments against one another. Christians should really be above that, right? 1 Corinthians, especially those in the local church, we should be above taking each other before authorities to solve our issues. That does not neglect the fact that our love for each other should supersede all of those things. And if I bring harm to you, I should make it right, okay? If I cause loss to you, to your person or to your property, let's make it right. Let's just try to do right by each other. It doesn't seem that complicated once you put it in those terms, right? All right, let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for your blessings on us, for the time together around your word this